How's that first class? You look tired. Oh wait, is that how you? Uthman? Yeah. Yeah.
It's good.
I know. He's got like something on every night.
Ḥanbali. It's good with you?
Alhamdulillah, we're still surviving. It's alhamdulillah, we're still figuring things out. We're at the Washington International Academy School, like above math.
Okay. Huh?
I know.
That one.
It's fun. It's fun. We're trying to figure things out. But you should come through sometime, inshallah.
What time do this?
7:15.
Exactly your time.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's literally the same time. Well,
There we go. Okay. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Anbiya wa Mursaleen Nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ajma'in. Amma ba'd. I know we started the chapter of Ihram. You think you come to the side? So these are the things that were recommended for the one who is taking the Ihram. We had started talking about this last time, and we had said that making ghusl, personal hygiene, what that entails, what that is, having reasonable substitutes for them. And we had said that for plucking, shaving is a reasonable substitute. There's nothing wrong with it. The idea, again, is to remove the hair from these areas. How you do it, there is a recommended and a preferred way, but these are not obligatory ways to remove those hairs. So for example, if an individual shaves his armpit hair, or if he gets it lasered, or if he uses I don't want to say it's an epilator. Oh, is that what it's called, right? You know, if he uses these different I'm married, so it's the only reason I know any of this stuff. So like, and what do you call it? In waxing, so there are a number of ways of doing this. I think laser is a new thing. I actually received a question: is it okay for a woman to go to a salon and actually get a Brazilian wax and these type of things? As long as she's not exposing her private areas, it's okay for her to go ahead and do that. There are places where it's actually, I know women who actually travel overseas to certain places to get it done because it's cheaper to get lasering done in those countries, in those places. Just like it's cheaper for men to get hair in Turkey. Don't ask me why I know that. So over here, perfuming yourself, we had said that perfuming the body before the ihram, or before taking or going into the state of ihram, that by agreement that this is permissible. So actually putting perfume on the body itself is fine. On the clothing, this is where it becomes problematic. But just to avoid problems and just to avoid issues, it is better not to do it. But saying that, the Shafis and the Hanbalis, they dislike it. They don't say that it is impermissible. The Hanafis and the Malikis, they say it's impermissible. So abstain from wearing sewn clothes. Now, sewn clothes means form-fitting. That's all that means here. It doesn't actually mean sewn, because even the ihram garment itself is stitched, right? It's a stitched garment. The only thing is it's not stitched on both ends, right? It doesn't actually fit a form. So if I took this off and I wrapped it around my shoulders, for example, that would be completely fine. That would be completely reasonable, because I'm not wearing it the way that it was intended to be worn. Having a lower garment and an upper garment, and it should be white. We said that wearing white was what? Was a sunnah, right? It's not something that is an obligation. Praying 2 rak'ah before entering the ihram, and sandals. There is a difference of opinion concerning the sandals. The majority saying that the sandals, if they wear them, it have to be below the ankles. The Hanabila, they differ in this, and they say that it is permissible above the ankles as well, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have stages to the hadith. Ibn Umar, he said, he narrated the hadith in Medina. Ibn Abbas, he narrated the hadith in Mecca. So you do have this difference of opinion concerning on what can be worn. So if a person wears shoes, for example, if you wear sneakers, would that be okay in the madhāhib? What are they?
Covered shoes.
So even
It covers completely.
Right, it covers completely. But what about a khuf?
Well, there is ikhtilaf, meaning there's the Prophet said, cut the khuf.
Yeah, but even if you cut the khuf below the ankle, what's happened? It's still what? It's below the ankle, but it's covering the entirety of the foot. Out of all these restrictions, there are certain things that, like these here, none of these apply to who? None of these apply to women, right? None of these things apply to women. Their ihram is actually, there are only two prohibitions for women in ihram. What are those? Women. Huh? There are only two things they're not allowed to do. They're not allowed to take niqab, and they're not allowed to wear gloves. Right. So these are the only two prohibitions that women have during ihram, in addition to not perfuming. In addition to not perfuming. Yes. Huh? Allahu alam. I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know the reasoning behind why that is. The only thing that we have is during the time, or during when Aisha radiallahu anha, when she made Hajj, she said that when men would pass, they would actually pull down their khimar, right? So they would pull it over the entirety of their face. So if any of you have ever made Hajj or Umrah before, you'll see the women who normally do niqab, what they do is that they'll actually take a lighter piece of the cloth, and they'll put it over the entirety of their face. It's more difficult to see, but you can still see. But even the people looking at them, they can still make out generally the features of the face, but they're not very sharp. It's not very clear. But that's usually the alternative for the women who cover. But these are all the recommendations. And then entering the state of ihram, it's meant to be done verbally out loud and make it exception. So when we talk about exceptions, this is something that an individual does before he takes the state of ihram. And what this is that at the time of ihram, if he says labbaik Allahumma bi umrah or labbaik Allahumma bi hajj, whatever his intention is, and then he makes this saying that, okay, I'm making the intention for hajj, except if I get stopped, right? Except if I get stopped. What that stopping power is, does it have to be an external factor or can it be an internal factor? These two things we'll talk about later. But making this exception is something that the Hanabila highly recommend, which is interesting considering you don't have the Prophet ﷺ regularly practicing this. You don't have the companions regularly practicing this. This is actually something he ordered a particular individual to do because she feared of completing her, I don't remember if it was Hajj or Umrah. Impermissible acts during ihram. So what am I not allowed to do in the state of ihram? Okay, all the things that we recommended to do before, those are things. Why do we recommend them? Because you won't be able to do them while in ihram. So trimming the hair, trimming the nails. What else?
Perfuming.
Perfuming. Yeah, okay, you can't perfume yourself. What else?
You can even smell it.
Huh? So for the Ḥanbalis, yes, yeah. Oh, extreme, bro.
How is that?
So for Ḥanbalis, they say that you cannot even intentionally smell, right? So if I'm passing by and I smell bukhur, that's very different than me walking into, right? Like walking, like, or walking into like a place that sells scents, right? Because I'm intentionally doing it now, and this is actually considered a mahdhura in the madhāhib. So cutting the hair. So if it is 3 or more hairs, for every hair, I have to give a mud. A mud is a handful, right? Who do I give this to? We'll talk about where it goes, but this is the penalty for that, unless it's an annoyance. Like what? Like bangs, right? Something coming. Well, I mean, you can't just be like, what I mean, like, that. But it's more like, the eyelid, like the eyelashes, like, if they come in your eye, something like that, or it has to actually be something that is bothering. It is an annoyance. It's an actual annoyance. I'm sorry. Like maybe an ingrown hair, right? Like, and it's painful, or it's like, I mean, like, these would be exceptions for that.
Under the mustache.
No, because there's a difference in an annoyance that would actually. Let me think of what's a good way of expressing this. So she was like, okay, what if like for a guy, sometimes their mustaches, they overgrow, right? So they'll hang below the lip, which is annoying. I agree. Yeah, but it's not annoying to the point where it can limit function. Like, for example, like an eyelash, if it's in my eye, what is the problem? Or it's right, you have problems that of actually seeing, and that's where it can become an issue. Or the example of like an ingrown, what's going to happen? It's actually going to hinder my hajj because what? Because it's painful, right? Because it's painful. What if it's an ingrown hair that doesn't hurt? Then I have to leave it, right? In that case, I would have to leave it. Combing. Can I comb my hair while I'm in the state of ihram?
can, but then you're risking to hair falling.
All right. So are there hair or is there hair that sheds naturally because it's dead?
Yeah.
There is, right? And then there's hair that's actually attached. So when I comb, I'm actually mixing the two. And the problem with that is now I'm going to have to actually sit down and figure out which hair is dead and which hair is not. And then accordingly, I would pay the penalty. Trimming nails. So over here, because we don't have a specific text, you don't have the lahiris, they do not heavily rely on qiyas. They heavily do not rely on analogy. And as such, they say that it is okay to trim the nails. Because they say that the analogy for trimming the nails is based on the impermissibility of cutting the hair. Wearing fitted or sewn clothes or sandals. The sandals, like we said, in general, in most of the madhāhib, if the sandal is what? Above the ankles, right? Above the ankles. Is no penalty if worn as not intended. And what do I mean by that? The same thing I was saying, like, for example, if I took off this abaya and I wrapped it around my shoulders, right? So instead of wearing it and then putting my hands into the sleeves, I took it and I actually wrapped it around my shoulders. Then in that situation, it would be permissible to wear. Covering the head and or ears. Obviously, this applies to men only, right? It doesn't apply to women. You have some of the sisters making hajj be like, nah, I don't have to. Right? You know, that's all I need to hear. And in the madhab, there's actually an additional ruling. So who else does this? Who else keeps everything uncovered if that thing moves with you? So like an umbrella or even sitting in a bus. Which group is actually well known for this? Yeah. For the Shia, right? The Shia are well known for not doing this. Well, guess what? Us too. It's a very Ḥanbali thing. So if it actually moves with you, this is considered a mahdura. You are not allowed to have it. There are some concessions. You do have a difference. Like, you know, the vast majority of scholars, they actually allow this, but it is something that I thought was pretty cool. I walk with an umbrella. So which is also interesting. So they have different types of, they have new types of umbrellas. For those of you that have made hajj before, they have shoulder umbrellas. I don't know if you guys have seen these. So basically, like they sit on your shoulder and like it covers, you know, it covers your head. And they also have those ones where you like the hat ones. The hat ones I find problematic personally because you're actually putting something physically on your head. But the shoulder ones, it's kind of, you know what I mean? It's kind of towing the line a little bit. Interestingly enough, it is at that time where you will have most of the phone companies handing out umbrellas. Like it's like free advertisement for them. So, you know, everybody's walking around with this free umbrella. Applying perfume to the body or clothes. We said this is something that is not permissible. Also, or intentionally smelling. This is, again, something unique to the madhab. Personal hygiene isn't technically perfuming. What do we mean by that? If I don't find other soap except perfume soap to wash my hands and my hands are dirty, can I use it? Yes, right. In the madhab, there's nothing wrong with it because this is not, you're not going to call the soap perfume. You're going to call it what? Soap. Like you're going to call it soap. So you treat it as soap, but something that you'd call perfume, you would treat it as perfume. Killing wild game. Killing wild game is not permissible while you are in ihram and while you are in the haram. All right, so there are two. The state of ihram can start before, right? You actually enter the haram sanctuary, but once you enter the haram sanctuary, there's another layer of tahrim, another layer of prohibition that falls. So if somebody brings me hunted food, if somebody brings me duck while I'm in the state of ihram, is it permissible for me to consume? Yes, as long as I didn't tell the guy, hey, can you go hunt a duck? I'm really feeling like eating duck, right? That because at that point I am directly involved as a muhram, and at that point it is not permissible. No. This is wild game. Oh. Right. So the opposite of wild is domesticated. So domesticated animals include cows, right? Sheep, chicken, all those.
I have a question on the hair thing.
Yeah.
Because like your hair is staying with you. Or, like,
So, wallahu alam, it would seem that a lot of these annoyances are there because it creates a state of subservience, right? And it creates a state of discomfort. And being in that constant discomfort is a way to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You know, if it is this uncomfortable right now, how much more uncomfortable is it going to be on the day of judgment when we all have to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with all of our deeds? So, you know, these small discomforts are there again as reminders, like, you know, that we can't do this because remember, we said ihram is not what? It's not a clothing, it's a state, right? It's a state of being. And when we're in that state of being, we're constantly reminding ourselves that we are in that state. So for marriage, if somebody gets married while they are in the state of ihram, there's no penalty, but there is sin, right? There is sin on them. Lustful touching or looking, and this could be with your wife, or it could be with your spouse. It is not limited to, it is not just the haram one that is being spoken about here. And it leads to arousal, and even this leading to arousal, it can be, there are layers and there are stages to this. If an individual just gets aroused, then his ihram is still correct. His ihram is still correct. The only problem, or the only time that this becomes an issue, can you guys move up, make some space? The only time this actually becomes an issue, or this becomes a problem, is if it leads to some type of fluidic discharge. That fluidic discharge can either be in the form of ejaculation. If an individual ejaculates while they are in the state of ihram, then they have to slaughter. And the type of slaughter depends on the type of secretion. So if it's ejaculate, then it'll be a cow or a camel. And if it is pre-ejaculative fluid, then he would have to slaughter a smaller animal, which is a sheep or a goat. You will notice that none of the animals listed here are chickens. There is a minimum size to the type of animals, except for who allows the slaughter of chicken? The law. I know, right? So, but the rest of the madhāhib, there is a minimum size for the slaughtered animal, and the slaughtered animal begins with a sheep or goat sized animal. Then the next stage would be a camel or cow size. With a camel or cow, even with this, usually we split them into shares. So how many shares in a camel and or cow?
Cow is
7 for both, right? It's 7 shares each. There was a question.
The question was probably related to what you just said, because I was saying, what if they can't afford?
So if they can't afford it, we'll talk about, there's layers to the penalty, right? There's layers to the penalty when an individual slaughters. And some of them is you have a choice. You can actually choose one of them, or there's another group of penalties that you have where you have no choice unless you are actually unable to. So thinking does not apply. What does this mean? So if an individual is just thinking without looking, and it leads to arousal or it leads to ejaculation, his ihram is still valid. Because this is very similar to what? To a wet dream. And a wet dream by ijma, by consensus, does not invalidate the ihram. Intercourse. There's a big detailed explanation of what happens when we get to that. If an individual has intercourse in ihram, in umrah, it's very difficult for me to visualize how that would even happen, because umrah is basically what? It's just tawaf and sa'i, right? Tawaf and sa'i is just circumambulating around the Kaaba 7 times and then going between Safa and Marwa 7 times. How it would, like, unless you took a break, you know, it's very difficult for me to really visualize how that would happen. For the Hajj, it makes more sense because Hajj happens over a series of days. Impermissible acts during ihram, and this is for women, and we had said that she must uncover the face and hands. So it's not really uncovering her face and hands. That's not what's meant here. The Prophet ﷺ is a very clear hadith where he says la tatanaqabu, yani he says don't cover the face, yani don't cover the face in a way where your eyes are showing. And part of that, again, could be because there were women who would cover their face. So this was a way, again, the idea of having those small annoyances, right? You know, these just small inconveniences in constantly being aware and constantly being in that state. And this is a general prohibition, is dyeing with turmeric or saffron. Wallahu alam, the reasoning behind it, because yellow is not an impermissible dye, right? Like, so dyeing your clothes in yellow is fine. I would imagine the problem with these is what has more so to do with what?
Smell.
Not just if yellow is okay, then these would distract too.
Smell.
The smell, it can be strong, but even if you manage to deal with the smell, the cost, like saffron is really expensive, right? It's extremely pricey, and it's a sign of price. Like even a few strands, like I don't like, there are some sweets that they put saffron on, like just strands of saffron cost like a few bucks. So expiation, this is probably, we're going to be spending this until the end of the class. There are a lot of branches here, so please bear with me. So basically the expiation, or a hadi, which is a gift, it can apply depending on what the situation is. So if the sequence is not required, so remember we had talked about that you have to either go in order or you have a choice. In this group of penalties, you actually have a choice. The first of them is an ihram violation. The ihram violation are the things that we said were impermissible to do. Oh, I should probably move that out of the way. Can you just grab that image? Yeah. So in that case, you could slaughter, or you would fast for 3 days, or you could feed 6 people. This is, you have a choice, right? You have a choice in these 3. If you kill game, if you actually kill an animal, or if you hunt while you're in the state of ihram, you have to bring a comparable slaughter. So if I kill a large animal, I would have to slaughter a large animal. And if I killed a small animal, I would have to slaughter a small animal. Okay, if I don't find a comparable animal, or I have the choices comparable value in food. So if an animal costs X amount, I would buy that amount in food and I would distribute that. Or the third option is that I would take the comparable amount of value and I would apply that to the number of people I could feed. So these are the 3 choices that I have with that. Continuing on, where the sequence is required, the slaughter for Hajj. So this is the actual slaughter for Hajj, and the slaughter only happens in 2 types of Hajj. I know I only mentioned them like really quickly, but the 3 types of Hajj, there is tamattu', qiran, and ifrad. So tamattu' is when you do Hajj and Umrah separately. Qiran is when you combine them, and ifrad is when you do Hajj by itself. Slaughter is only necessary for 2 of these. And that is when you do Hajj and Umrah separately and when you do Hajj and Umrah together. Ifrad does not require slaughter. So for the slaughter for Hajj, I have to slaughter. Remember, I have to maintain the sequence here. If I cannot slaughter, then I have to fast for 3 days during Hajj. And I have to do 7 when I return. What does that mean? That means that the fasting can be the 7th, 8th, or 9th, or it can be the 11th, 12th, or 13th. Why can I not fast on the 10th? Arafah is 9th. Because it's Eid, and the Prophet ﷺ forbade fasting on Eid. These are called Ayam al-Tashriq, is where everybody spends time in Mina. So you can either fast this set of 3, or you can fast this set of 3, but I cannot start my 7 before I go home, meaning that I fast these 3, then I fast these 3 too. Are you guys following me? Right? Because 3 have to be while I'm in Ihram, and then 7 have to be when I go back. If I'm unable to do that, I have to feed 6 people. Yes.
The 3 and 7 need to be consecutive.
So that's actually a really good question. As long as they're within these windows, that's okay. The 7 do not have to be in consecutive. I think there's khilaf on that though. All of them, if they have to be consecutive or not.
The 11th and 13th.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, man. I don't remember. Yeah.
Is that the days that are prohibited to fast? 11, 12, 13?
So 11, 12 to 13 al khilaf if you consider them from the ayam al-Eid. Right. So everyone agrees that the 10th is haram.
Yeah.
The 11th, 12th, and 13th, you have some khilaf, with most of the scholars saying that it's makruh to fast in these 3 days. But if an individual wanted to, he actually could. But do you have to do them consecutively or not? I have to look into it, man. I remember that there is khilaf. I just don't remember exactly what the khilaf is. Or feed 6 people. Then you have two more categories of where the sequence is required. The first one, or three more actually, well, intercourse. So intercourse, we said this is the one where you have a series of problems or a series of issues. The first one, so before at-tahleel al-thani. So there are stages to the ihram when you make hajj. In order to, hajj has Arafah, which is the first and the biggest pillar. After Arafah, there are a series of things that I do. I have to stone, I have to do tawaf, I have to slaughter, I have to shave my head right there. I have to stay in Mina. There are a number of things that I have to do. Basically, before tahallul al-thani, this means that I have not either slaughtered yet, or I have not shaved my head yet, or I have not stoned yet. I have to do two out of these three in order to get out of my physical ihram. And once I do the third, I'm completely out of ihram, and now I can have intercourse with my spouse. Okay, so if I do two out of those three, I'm still in the first stage of ihram. The first stage of ihram is finished, and I can take the clothing off, and I can do everything except intercourse. And if I have intercourse in that time, I have to complete the hajj. This is the first thing. I have to slaughter a camel or a cow. I'm sorry, this is a tahallul al-awwal. So I haven't even done that yet, right? I haven't even done that yet. The first thing is I have to complete the hajj. I have to slaughter or a camel or a cow. If I can't do that, I have to fast for 10 days. And then I have to perform hajj the following year. So this is the most extreme punishment for this individual who actually has intercourse when he or she makes hajj. So if you need to stay away from your spouse during those few days, please, do it. Otherwise, it's like you're talking about a series of events that are extremely problematic. During Umrah or after the major exit, he just has to slaughter a sheep, and then he could re-enter the state of Ihram by exiting the Haram. So over here, this is the one where he did two out of the three things that we spoke about. Over here, he hasn't done two out of three. He still hasn't finished yet. He hasn't gotten to that point yet. So he has to do all of these things. In this one, he's stoned and he's slaughtered, for example. He's stoned and he's slaughtered. At that point, he is now he is in tahallul al-thani, and he can slaughter a sheep and re-enter the state of the haram by exiting the haram, and he can go to Tan'im, for example, and that's outside of the haram boundary, which we had talked about before, and then re-enter Makkah. For Umrah, only the Umrah is spoiled. So we had said that only the Umrah is spoiled, and he would have to slaughter a goat or a sheep. Any questions on any of these? So if he misses a wajib, like for example, he gets to Arafah or he gets to Makkah and Arafah is already over. So in that situation, but he's in Ihram. He missed his bus, plane, whatever the case might be. He rushed to get there, but by the time he got there, the day was over. Now, when does the day end? That's another issue of khilaf. But you do have indications that, so I think I'm trying to think of when I know the Zahiri, I'll get back to you. Let me just complete this thought. The Zahiris actually allow until Fajr.
For which day?
For Arafah.
Okay.
So, huh?
No, right.
So from basically the Arafah quote unquote time, when does it start? It starts from Zawal, right? It starts from Dhuhr. And it continues, and you stay in Arafah from Dhuhr until Maghrib. And then at Maghrib time, you leave for Muzdalifah. So some scholars would say that this Maghrib time is actually the cutoff point. And there are other scholars who say that the time actually continues until Fajr, but it's only for the one who wasn't able to make it. So he would slaughter a goat or sheep if he is unable to fast 10 days. Remember, we're trying to, the order here is maintained. تفضل Razak.
I was just wondering, when you say wajib, did you like what you meant by it? Did you mean like the generic wajib or like the specific like wajib that's like opposed to like farm?
Oh, okay. No. Over here. So for the Hanabila, when they talk about the wajibat of a particular action, they're talking about those things that if an individual misses them, then he did not miss a pillar, but he's sinful for missing it.
Same thing. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ihsar, this is the last thing, and this is basically some type of impediment. So if you're being stopped from performing it, ihsar has two meanings. So outside forces, this would be the Shafis and the Ḥanbalis, or internal forces, which would be the Hanafis and the Malikis as well. So what are outside forces? For example, like security. 1 second. Security. You have visa issues. You get robbed on the way, right? So these are all external forces that would actually stop you. Yes, go ahead.
I was just gonna add COVID.
COVID. Okay, yeah, for sure. For if a person got COVID,
Or they
yeah.
don't have their vaccine card.
Oh, they don't have their vaccine. So yeah, but I mean, I can't imagine them having taken ihram at that point. Right. And like you get to Saudi and they're like, "Where's your vaccine card?" You're like, it's like, I'm not sharing that information with you. All right. And they're like, okay, go back to your country. I mean, but those are all reasonable outside forces. Internal forces, like for example, if an individual gets sick on the way. So those are all reasonable. Those are all good reasons that an individual would actually be stopped. How do you avoid all this? By doing the exception we had talked about before. In habasani habas, yani mahalli haythu habastani fi. That if I am stopped by some force, then my ihram, or I will take off my ihram wherever I am stopped. And that's all you have to do at the time of making intention. But this is the situation where we don't do that. So what happens here is, like, let's say that I made it to Mecca, but I get stopped from going to Arafah, right? Arafah is a pillar, right? It's something that's really important. At this point, I would just make Umrah. What if I made it to Arafah? Then I would have to slaughter. I would complete my Hajj there, like, and I'm not able to come back into Mecca. Like, I made it to Arafah, but I can't complete the rest of Hajj. At that point, again, I would have to slaughter. If I'm unable to at all, at this point, you would have a difference of opinion, depending on if you were stopped before the final tawaf or after the final tawaf. Okay, I don't know why the window closed. Is it okay? Just click on Internet Explorer and restore the pages. And go ahead and scroll down a lot. I should probably separate the slides into sections. Oh no, alhamdulillah. Not bad. So hit present. I'm sorry. Then go control, just present. What happened to Zoom? Hit escape real quick, Nazim. And click on Zoom. See what happened. Okay, yeah, share screen. In the middle. And then Fiqh. Here, Google Slides. Jazakallah khair. All right. Can you just click on the screen? Yeah, I should probably rearrange the slides, right? I think going through 500 slides is probably not the easiest. Huh? Oh, it's not fun. Making these individual animations on there, it's very time consuming. So basically, if there's a final tawaf in order to get out of or to complete the Hajj. So what would happen for the Ḥanbalis? They said, okay, if you get detained before making the final tawaf, you would actually wait 7 years, and you would forever be in the state of ihram. Wait 7 years. Yeah, this is the Ḥanbalis. Represent. No, you can't.
That's what I was.
So you actually can't be intimate with your spouse. You have to wait. Why? Because there's a possibility you'll make it back to complete your Hajj. The Shafis, they're like, nah, bro. Just slaughter, shave your head, and just be on your way. Like don't worry about it. It's okay. It happens. I thought it was hilarious. But I mean, there's a very similar issue. Well, it's not a similar issue, but this waiting issue, it comes up in other situations too. Like, so for example, if a husband of a wife goes missing.
Until his generation. That's crazy.
So if your husband ever ends up going missing, how long is a woman supposed to wait until her marriage is now invalid?
Until the last of her generation.
Until no. Until his age reaches 120 years, because it's not possible. Yeah, I'm being serious. Until his age is 120 years, because it's not possible to have him live like that. Huh? Oh, yeah. No, actually, I think the Hamidis might actually have it at like 10 years.
The Shafis is generation.
It's a generation, yeah.
Who's 120 then? Who's that?
Huh? 120? I don't remember, man. I have to go back and check.
Oh, I thought
Yeah.
that was Ḥanbali.
No. I mean, it could be. I wouldn't be surprised. It sounds about right. So don't lose your husbands, huh? So the only reason I know it's like a side rant, but the only reason I bring that up is because I had two cases like this, and the problem was they weren't legally married, so there was no way for me to even like try and subpoena the husband. So I was like, yeah, you need to find the guy, like, and there's not much I can do for you until you actually find him. So legal marriage, very important.
Bro, I can't shave my hair. I can wash my hair.
No, you can do all that. Yeah, because we're talking about التحلل الأول. التحلل الأول is done. So you حبست يعني قبل التحلل الثاني.
Okay.
So the only thing you can't do is جماع. No, I mean, I think it's extra personally, but whatever. Alhamdulillah. So how do I determine the number of violations? Like, so for example, if I perfume, I wore a hat, I put clothes on, I put shoes on, you know what I mean? How would I deal with all of those? So let's say I covered my head and I put on clothes. I was like, oh, I can't wear this Ihram anymore. And I put on clothes and I was like, okay, I'm stinking a little bit, clean it up, clip my nails, fix my hair. I'm still in Ihram. So how many penalties would I pay here?
You would pay once if you have done everything. I mean, if you have done every, you have not paid the penalty between these. If you if you clip your hair and your nail,
Yeah.
went and did the kafara, you came back and you decided to perfume yourself.
Again,
Now you have to do
okay,
it again.
yes. All right,
If
so
you've done
yeah.
everything,
Uh-huh.
and then we are waiting until the end, and we'll pay one penalty for all of that.
Mhm.
That will be quite valid.
So
as far as I know.
you actually pay depending on the grouping,
Ah.
right? So yeah, so you actually group them. So when we talked about here, let's use the worst example. I trim my hair and nails. How many penalties are there? There's one penalty. Why? Because that's one jins, that's one type. I covered my head. That's another type. I wore clothing. That's another type. But I wouldn't pay for every fingernail. I wouldn't pay for every hair, right? But these, because they're in groupings, for every single violation that I did in that grouping, I would pay one animal for that violation. And this is why it's not uncommon to find, like, for example, soldiers or people who are in public defense sector, they will continue wearing their uniforms until the end of Hajj. They'll make Hajj, but then they'll pay one animal, right? They'll pay one animal at the end.
What if you violate? Like you don't know.
So we'll get to accident and forgetfulness. And because the thing is, there are cases where even if it's by accident or forgetfulness, you would still have to pay some type of penalty. Except for game animals. So game animals, remember, it's every single animal, right? We had talked about over here, it's like a grouping. Over here, it's every single animal. So like actually individual events would be problematic there. So what if I forget? So concessions applied to certain situations. So for example, if I accidentally cut my nails, I forgot. In that situation, there is, in the madhāhib, you would have to, like, you still have to pay. There is a minority opinion amongst the Ḥanbalis and the Shafis. They say that you don't have to if you do it out of forgetfulness. And Zahiris, they don't see it to be an issue anyway. Perfuming, the concession, if I forget and I perfume, then it's okay. That's not a problem. If I accidentally cover my head, again, that's okay. It's not a problem. Killing a game animal, this is only the lahadis, right? That they say that if you do it out of forgetfulness, then it's okay. Everything else, you will still have to pay, even if you do it out of forgetfulness or out of, what's the other one? Forgetfulness. An accident, yes, thank you. So over here, all of these would be the ones where you wouldn't be held accountable, but the other ones you would be held accountable for those things. Like if I put on clothes, for example, while I'm in Ihram, at that point I would have to slaughter, even if I did it by accident or forgetfulness. Intercourse doesn't spoil the Hajj for the Shafi'is if it is done out of forgetfulness, and all the person has to do is slaughter. Who are the poor of the haram? Because we had said, like, there are certain payments that have to be made, and they would be paid to the poor of the haram. It's not actually the residents. It's not the actual people who live there, but the people who are physically there, whether they're there for Hajj, whether they're for Umrah, or they're the people that live there, or the people who are traveling through there. So if the violation happens outside of the haram, so for example, if I made a violation in Arafah, I'm technically outside of the haram space. Even in that, I would actually pay now in that space. Or if I did the Ihram violation, for example, after the miqat, between the miqat and between Makkah, then I would actually pay in whatever space it is that I'm in. The types of Hajj, this is something, inshallah, that we'll get into next time, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But we'll end here. 5 minutes is going to be in Salah. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin, Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi sahbihi wa sallam.
I had a question.
Yes.
So do the Hanafi think niqab is farz?
No, none of the madhāhib do.
None of them are.
Yeah, none of the madhāhib view the niqab to be an obligation. No, but no, I
That's why.
think so. I don't know anyone. Abdul Razak.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, something like that. Whenever Maliki, there are like details. It's like it's a nuance. It's a nuance.
So the thing is, the only positions that I'm aware of is, like, classically, nobody said it was an open obligation. The only times that you have any of them even talking about it is like in times of fitan.
Yeah.
Right. So a good question would be, is like, okay, how do you determine fitna? And who determines fitna? The Wali al-Amr. That's one. Who else? I mean, very honestly,
Myself.
it's yourself, right? So, if you're in a situation where you know that, okay, it's probably better for me to cover my face here, then what are you going to do? Going to cover your face. So I think that's where a little bit of the nuance actually comes in. Like, who actually determines the fitna? If men determined the times of fitna, when would they be? All the time, right? There wouldn't be a time where there's never a time in history where men weren't like, no, this year women were not fitna, right? So I think historically it's never been an issue where, like, okay, it's the men who are actually dictating that this is a fitna time. This is something that women would actually determine for themselves. It doesn't feel natural that it would be something that would be imposed, which is why you have. And I'll give two examples. You have the example of Saudi and you have the example of Yemen. In Saudi, a vast majority of women, and this is my personal experience, when they leave the country, what happens? Right, they remove it. And if they felt it was in a religious obligation, what would happen? They would have kept it on, right? If I felt something is religiously binding, I as an individual, what am I going to do? I'm going to keep practicing it regardless of where I am. In Yemen, it's more cultural. Right. It's more, I mean, it's more cultural, and it's more, yeah, there's like a safety issue there too. Like, Yemen's at war, and, they've unfortunately, it's been on and off with the safety over there. So kidnapping is a real thing, that we have to really think about. That is a problem in some of these places, which is why you have some women coming. Discomfort. That's a real thing too. I know there were a lot of women when I was studying in Mecca, they don't wear niqab here, but they would wear niqab there. Why? Because they felt uncomfortable. Like, I mean, if you're the only woman who's not wearing niqab, where's everybody going to look? Right? They're going to look at the woman who's not wearing or who's not covering her face. So I think those are real issues that need to be taken into account.
So
Yeah.
also who think the minority movement is what it's from.
Yeah.
In Hajj, so they say it's because it's a prophetic command.
So you do have, and this is like more of an Najdi thing. I haven't seen others say this, but so like you have a lot of Najdi scholars who say, okay, because it's a need, then a woman can do niqab while she's in the state of ihram.
Okay.
But for me, I find that difficult when you have a clear command from the Prophet ﷺ, and you have alternatives, right? You have alternatives where a woman can take and like, she can cover her face entirely. So
That might say wear some sort of like device so it doesn't like touch.
yeah, so it doesn't touch your face. Yeah,
Right.
that's part of it too. I've seen that too. I don't think that's an opinion in the madhāhib, especially for the Hanafis. But I think that there are certain scholars from the Deobandi school who really push that narrative and say that that's what's necessary. But I don't know if that's actually required in the madhāhib, because the Deobandi school is just one manifestation of certain opinions within the madhab itself. And Allah knows best. Inshallah, we have our tazkiyah class after salah. That is iqama, yes. It's good, man. How you feeling?
Good.
Morning, man, chocolate.